Hi guys. Okay, today we're going to talk about division of rational expressions. So here we have an example, 16r squared over 3 divided by 12 over 5r. Now the key to division is actually multiplication. So in order to divide by a fraction, we actually multiply by the multiplicative inverse. Now what is a multiplicative inverse? That's just a reciprocal. So a reciprocal is when you turn the fraction upside down. So for instance, this division problem becomes 16r squared over 3 times, division becomes multiplication, and we flip the second fraction. And there we go, 5r over 12. Now, we're going to multiply the numerators and denominators because now it's just the same steps we had for multiplication. So 16 times 5 is 80. R squared times r, the 2 plus the 1 gives us an exponent of 3. And in the bottom, 3 times 12 is 36. Now we're going to factor and divide out the common factors. So we have nothing to factor, but we need to look at the 80 over 36. Now, remember guys, you have a calculator, and if you type 80 divided by 36 and hit enter on our TI Inspire calculators, it's going to give you the fraction in simplest form, okay? But do not type the r cubed into the fraction. But if we're doing this by hand, what number goes into 80 that also goes into 36? Well, 4 goes into 80 20 times and into 36 9 times. So that gives us in the top, what do we have? This is our simplified part. In the top, we have 20r cubed left, and in the bottom, we have 9. And there we go. Okay, now the one thing I want to remind you about simplifying though, especially when we get to the next problems where we have factors, remember you can only cancel, which means divide to 1, top to bottom, not side to side. So when you want to cancel something out, one has to be in the top, the other has to be in the bottom. You can't cancel out 2 that are in the top or 2 that are in the bottom. All right, let's try another one. So here we have a squared plus 3a minus 10 over a squared plus 6a minus 7 divided by 9a cubed minus 18a squared all over 3a squared plus 18a minus 21. Well, the first step is to keep the first fraction. Change division to multiplication, and flip the second fraction. All over 9a to the third minus 18a squared. Okay, now we're going to factor. So we're ready to factor. We look at the first trinomial in the top of the first fraction, a squared plus 3a minus 10. Since it's a trinomial with no greatest common factor, we're going to need 2 parentheses. And since we have an a squared in the front and an a in the middle, we know we need an a and an a. Now, since I am factoring, I need 2 numbers that multiply to negative 10 and add to positive 3. If they multiply to negative 10, their signs are different. One is positive, one is negative. If they're adding to a positive 3, that means that the bigger number is positive and the smaller number is negative. Now, if I think about my numbers that go into 10, 1 and 10, if I use a negative 1 and a positive 10, that's going to add to 9. 2 and 5, however, if I use a negative 2 and a positive 5, they will multiply to negative 10 and add to positive 3. Now let's take a look at the denominator. Again, we have a trinomial that does not have a common factor. We have an a squared in the front and an a in the middle, so we're going to need an a and an a at the beginning of each. Our numbers need to multiply to negative 7 and add to a positive 6. Well, the only numbers that multiply to 7 are 1 and 7. Now, if they have to multiply to a negative 7, the signs have to be different. And if we want them to add to a positive 6, the 7 has to be positive and the 1 has to be negative. Now we're going to multiply by, now this trinomial, 3a squared plus 18a minus 21 has a common term. 3 goes into 3, 3 goes into 18, and 3 goes into 21. So I'm going to write my greatest common factor 3 and open up parentheses. 3 goes into 3a squared. The 3's cancel out. I'm left with a squared. Plus 3 goes into 18 6 times, and I keep my a. Minus 3 goes into 21 7 times. Well, guess what, guys? We're not done factoring. We're going to keep that 3, but this a squared plus 6a minus 7 is a trinomial. Now, wait a minute. That sounds like a very similar trinomial. Didn't we just factor that over here? A squared plus 6a minus 7? We did. So that's a minus 1 times a plus 7. That's the exact same thing we had over here, only now we have a 3 in front of it. And this fraction is all over. We still have to take care of the bottom. Now we have 9a cubed minus 18a squared. We have as a greatest common factor, 9 goes into both 9 and 18. And not just an a, but an a squared. So we're going to write 9a squared and open parentheses. Well, the 9 goes into 9 once, and a to the third divided by a squared is just a to the first, minus 18 divided by 9 is 2, and a squared divided by a squared goes away to nothing. Okay, now we're going to multiply straight across. We have an a minus 2, an a plus 5. I'm going to put my number 3 up front because I always put numbers up front. Then an a minus 1 and an a plus 7. All over. Now we're going to write everything that's in the bottom. An a minus 1, an a plus 7. I'm going to bring that 9a squared to the front since it's not in parentheses. And then an a minus 2. Now we're going to look to simplify. Do we have any exact matches? I see an a minus 2 in the top and 1 in the bottom. I see an a minus 1 and an a minus 1. I also see an a plus 7 and an a plus 7. Now if we take a look, right now we're left with 3 times a plus 5 all over 9a squared. We're not done because that 3 and the 9, 3 goes into 3 once and into 9 3 times. We could have done that in the previous step, but you may not have seen that. So now I have a plus 5 over 3a squared. And this is my answer to the division problem. Let's try another. Okay, here we go. Now remember, for division, the only new step we have is to change division to multiplication and flip the second fraction. Okay, so we're going to keep the 3k squared over the k plus 5, change division to multiplication, and we're going to flip the second fraction. K squared plus k minus 20 all over k minus 4. And we're going to factor whatever we can. Well, fortunately, we don't have to factor 3k squared. We don't have to factor k plus 5. We don't even have to factor the new denominator k minus 4, but we do have to factor k squared plus k minus 20. There is no greatest common factor. It is a trinomial. And since we have a k squared with a k in the middle, we need the k at the beginning of each. And I am factoring. I need two numbers that multiply to negative 20 and add to positive 1k. Well, if they're multiplying to a negative 20, their signs are different. And if they're adding to a positive 1, The bigger number is positive, the smaller number is negative. What multiplies to negative 20 and adds to positive 1? And you can think about your factors. We could use 1 and 20. They add to 19. No good. 2, which we keep negative, goes in 10 times. That'll add to 8. 3 does not go into 20, but 4 does 5 times. And again, the 4 is negative, the 5 is positive, and they add to a positive 1. So now we have our magic numbers, -4 plus 5. Okay. Now we multiply straight across everything that's in the top, 3k squared times k minus 4 times k plus 5 all over everything that's in the bottom, k plus 5 times k minus 4. And now we look for exact matches. My k plus 5's cancel out, my k minus 4's cancel out. The only thing left is 3k squared in the top, and the bottom only has a 1, and we never leave a 1 in the denominator. Okay, let's look at this problem. So the first step, we keep the first fraction, change division to multiplication, and flip the second fraction. P squared minus 4p minus 5 all over p minus 7. Now we're going to factor. We're going to keep the p plus 7, and in the bottom, it's a trinomial with no greatest common factor. We have a p squared, and the middle term has p's, so we need a p and a p. I am factoring. I need two numbers that multiply to positive 7. So if they're multiplying to positive, their signs are the same. And they're adding to a positive 8, which is why they're both positive. The only numbers that multiply to 7 are 1 and 7. Now you might see it already that the p plus 7 and the p plus 7 divide. And remember, when they cancel, they divide to 1. So the top of that fraction is 1. Now let's look at the next fraction. The p minus 7 is in the bottom. And in the top, again, we have a trinomial. We have a p squared in front and a p in the middle. So we need p and p. I am factoring. So I need two numbers that multiply to negative 5. If they multiply to negative 5, they have to have different signs. And because they're adding to negative 4, the bigger number is going to be negative, the smaller number is going to be positive. The only numbers that multiply to 5 are 1 and 5. And if I make the 1 positive and the 5 negative, they will add to negative 4. All right, next step. Multiply everything in the top. 1 times p plus 1 times p minus 5 all over. Now multiply everything that's left in the bottom. P plus 1 times p minus 7. Look for an exact match. The p plus 1's go away. The only thing left in the top, p minus 5. The only thing left in the bottom, p minus 7. And there we go. It's done. Okay, guys, here's another one. So the first step, we keep the first fraction, n minus 1 over 5n squared minus 5n. Change the division to multiplication. Flip the second fraction. So now it's 5n squared plus 40n all over 4n squared. Now we're going to factor. N minus 1 doesn't factor. In the bottom, there's a common term. They have a common 5 and they have a common n. So I'm going to write 5n and open up one parentheses. 5n squared divided by 5n, the 5's cancel out to 1, and n squared divided by n is n squared, minus 5n divided by 5n, anything divided by itself is 1. And again, you might see it top to bottom. There's an exact match. They're going to divide to 1. Now the next fraction, again, we have a greatest common factor. They have a 5 in common and an n. So we're going to write 5n and open up parentheses. 5n squared divided by 5n is n. 40 divided by 5 is a positive 8. And n divided by n divides to 0. All over 4n squared. Now we multiply across the top. 1 times 5n times n plus 8. And in the bottom, we have 5 times 4 is 20. N times n squared is n to the third. Now we're looking to simplify. 5 goes into 5 once and into 24 times. Now just let's look at the n over n cubed for a minute. In the top we have n, and n cubed, remember, is n times n times n. One of those will cancel, and in the bottom we have n times n, which is n squared. So the n squared stays in the bottom because there were more of them left. And remember, the exponent in the top was 1, the exponent in the bottom was 3. If you subtract, you get a negative 2. Even if you do it the other way around, 3 minus 1, you get 2, but you say I had more n's in the bottom, so my n squared goes in the bottom. Now in the top, all I have left is n plus 8, and in the bottom, I have 4n squared. Remember, you cannot simplify that anymore because the n plus 8, they're attached to each other. The n and the 8 are attached by addition, so you can't divide them with anything else unless it's an exact match. Okay, last problem. We're going to take the first fraction and keep it. M squared minus 3m minus 40 all over m minus 8. We change division to multiplication. We flip the second fraction. 5m squared on the top. 5m plus 25 is now in the bottom. Now the top of the first fraction is a trinomial that does not have a common factor. Since it's an m squared with an m in the middle, we need m and m. I am factoring. I need two numbers that multiply to a negative 40 and add to negative 3. Since they're multiplying to negative 40, their signs are different, and since they're adding to negative 3, the bigger number is going to be that negative. What multiplies to 40? Well, we've got 1 and 40. That adds to 39. 2 and 20. That adds to negative 18. 3 does not go into 40. 4 goes in 10 times. That adds to negative 6. We're getting closer. 5 goes into 40, negative 8 times, and when I add those, there it is, they add to negative 3. So I need a plus 5 minus 8. Now in the bottom, I have m minus 8, and you might see it, the m minus 8s are going to divide to 1. Okay, times, we keep the 5m squared all over. Now 5m plus 25 has a greatest common factor of 5. So I write my 5 and then parentheses. 5m divided by 5, the 5's cancel out, I'm left with m. Plus 25 divided by 5 is 5. Now you might see it, those 5's are going to divide out to 1. Now if I multiply across the top, I have an m plus 5 and I have an m squared. In the bottom, the only thing I have is an m plus 5. And I have an exact match with those m plus 5's, and the only thing left is m squared. And there we go, guys. That's it for tonight. Have a good one. See you soon.